Society of St. Louis, which is basically an atheist church. It's a humanist congregation in St. Louis, Missouri. And I am a gay humanist. And so, yes, you can applaud that. That was a bit tepid. Let's see. Yes, right, that's better. That's what more I'm used to back in my day job. And for me, those two parts of my identity are very closely intertwined. I feel that that phrase, gay humanist, sums up a lot about me. And not incidentally, those two pieces of identity are very closely linked in our culture, I think. And I want to talk to you today about how humanism and the LGBTQ movement are interconnected and what you can do about it. And I'm going to start by telling you a little bit more of my own story to show how they're connected in my own life, following up from what I said yesterday. I mentioned yesterday that I was 17 years old when I first told my parents that I thought I might be gay. We were eating at an Italian restaurant around the corner of our house, a family night out, perhaps after a movie or something. And everyone was laughing and eating and having a good time. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure because I've learned that Missouri likes to eat. But I love food. I could eat pizza literally every day of my life. And then one of my family made a joke about gay people, and I burst into tears. And as I was crying, tears streaming down my face, I said, I don't think you should make jokes about those people, because I think I am one. Seems funny now to me. Time froze. Everyone stopped talking and looked at me. Looked at each other, their forks hovering between the plate and their mouths, bits of spaghetti dripping down onto the plates. It was like the whole restaurant had heard what I had said, which is quite possible because I said it kind of loud. I'm a bit of a drama queen. And I waited for my world to end. We got back home from the restaurant and I sat down in the front room with my mum and we talked about sex. Those are the best kind of conversations when you're a teenager, right? When you talk with your mum about your sex life. That's really how I want to spend my evenings. And she asked me some very sincere questions. She said, have you ever had sex with a woman? And I told her the truth, I hadn't. And she said, have you ever had any experiences with guys? And again, I told her the truth, that I hadn't. And then she asked, do you have any sexual feelings towards any of your guy friends? And this was the critical moment. This was my chance to tell her that yes, I had the same feelings of attraction towards other guys that most people my age had towards women at the time. This was my chance to tell her that my obsession with Leonardo DiCaprio, even getting my hair cut like his and having blonde highlights done, I'm not kidding, I'll show you the photos afterwards if you want to see them, was not because I thought he was a great actor. This was my chance to be honest and tell the truth, to stop lying to myself and to other people about who I was. She came out and directly asked me the question, after I'd already told them that I thought I might be gay. And I lied. I lied to my mother. I couldn't go through with it. I was too afraid and ashamed. So instead of doing what I knew I should do, speak up and tell the truth about who I was, I kept everything inside. I stayed silent. And I finished that night, when I was 17 years old, the same position I had begun it, in the closet. And I stayed like that for 10 years. I spent 10 years in the closet, keeping silent, dating girls, refusing to raise my voice and be who I was. In fact, when I first got to America 8 years ago now, which is kind of a horrifying thought, I'm told my accent is degrading, which is a terrible thing, I was still dating women. But that impulse, that feeling that something wasn't quite right, which caused me to blurt out at dinner in that Italian restaurant that I thought I was gay many years before, stuck with me. So eventually, when my relationship with my last ever girlfriend, Sarah, was getting more serious. We'd been together for 2.5 years, and we were talking about kids and marriage and getting a house and looking at strollers in Toys R Us and things like that. It was very romantic. I can see some of you kind of puking in your mouths a bit. We decided we had to go on a break so that I could figure myself out, because I'd been very open with all my relationships about the struggles I was having with my sexuality. So we did, and I was left trying to figure my sexuality out. Now, how do you do that? Does anyone know? Because it took me a long time to discover. How do you take a lifetime of repression and fear and guilt and secrets and unravel them on demand? Well, it turns out that you go to New Orleans. Yeah, that's how you do it. It's amazing. New Orleans, the Big Easy, site of the very first annual humanist graduate community at Harvard spring break service trip, which happened, wow, 5 years ago in March. We were there as basically just like any religious service trip would go over spring break, to work beside the people of New Orleans to do cleanup, rebuild houses after what had happened in Katrina. But I was also there during my break with Sarah to be the gayest James that I could be, to try on a new identity and see how it fit, if only for a week. I still don't know exactly why that trip seemed like the right time to do this, but something in me told me it was. And I remember so much of that trip so vividly. The plane as it lands, banking left and right, tilting its wings up and down, New Orleans coming into view in small oval windows, scenes of the city alternating with bright expanses of shining water. And as the week progresses, I let it all out. I fulfilled every gay stereotype. Every time I saw a cute guy, I would say so. Every time I wanted to compliment someone's clothing, I would do it. Every time I wanted to sing a song from a musical, I sang it. Well, I was doing that anyway, to be honest. I even began to dress differently, buying a fabulous skin-tight black shirt with this fleur-de-lis sculpted in rhinestones on the front. I still have it. I kind of wish I'd worn it today. It's a little hot. And I would wear it on, like every night I wore it. And somehow it felt right. I felt myself coming into focus, like the image in a pair of binoculars when you twist the lenses. And on our last day in town, I decided to take a pilgrimage. Clad in my fleur-de-lis shirt, with my iPhone as my guide, I trek to Café Lafitte in Exile, America's oldest gay bar, according to them at least, towards the end of famous Bourbon Street. And I remember tingling as I walked through the door. I don't drink, so I'm not one for bars in any case, and this was my first time ever in a gay bar. I make my way up the stairs and out onto the balcony, lean on the railing, and look down the street in the cool night air, and I felt at home. Later, as the bar was getting more and more crowded, a man who wanted to get past me put his hands on my hips, shifted me gently to the side, and says, "Excuse me, darling." Just that touch, that one touch, and a tingle runs through my body, a shudder through my bones, and I realize, oh, that's what it's meant to feel like. 10 years of repression melts in an instant, gone in the soft heat of a southern draw. And suddenly, I know who I am. It's as if I've been trying to fit the last piece of a jigsaw puzzle into place, turning it this way and that, twisting it and bending it, trying to force it. And now suddenly it finds its place where it was meant to be all along, but the picture that it makes is different from what I imagined, but so much more beautiful. I'm home. Home at last. It was on that trip that I found myself. And I still get emotional talking about it. I went home and I called Sarah. I called the love of my life, which is what I had called her many times, to tell her that I'm gay. That was the most difficult phone call of my life. By comparison, my family was much easier. My sister, when I told her, said, "Oh my God, at last." And I was like, "Thanks, you could have told me." My brother said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're happy. I'm in the middle of a game of Call of Duty. I have to get back to it," which is kind of the best response you can get. And my parents were both and have always been very supportive. Then I went on Grindr, found a guy, and if you want the details of that, you'll have to ask me privately afterwards. But it was awesome. For me, then, my identity as a gay man is closely linked to my humanism. It was on a humanist service trip that I found myself. So I find it perfectly natural to come to an event like this on Pride weekend and talk about the relationship between humanism and LGBTQ issues. In my mind, there are natural connections between our two communities, between the community of non-believers, skeptics, atheists, humanists, etc., and the LGBTQ community. And I want to talk about three aspects of those connections, particularly in relation to what's been happening here in Springfield recently. First, our communities both have a shared experience of social marginalization. While the experience of atheists in America is nowhere near as challenging, for the most part, as the experience of LGBTQ people, atheists do know what it's like to be on the outskirts of society. Consider, for instance, that while there are a number of openly gay, lesbian politicians right now who hold high office, there are none who openly disbelieve in God anymore, not a single one. It's amazing that a country that claims to respect diversity of religious opinion effectively bars non-religious people from office totally, with some high-profile politicians, including presidential candidates, openly denigrating atheists very, very frequently. In many smaller towns and in some bigger ones, people feel an enormous social pressure to belong to a church. Perhaps you felt it here in Springfield. Pressure which frequently leads people to keep quiet about their religious beliefs because they fear ostracism from their community. All religious people know that their beliefs can be a big part of your identity. And LGBTQ people know what it feels like to be afraid of being open about our identities. We can make common cause over our experience of marginalization. Secondly, and I think this is really interesting, and it's something that only came to me when I was working on this talk, which means in the car, basically, on the way here. No, not really. Some of the reasons for the marginalization of LGBTQ people and the marginalization of atheists are quite similar. And to get what I mean, think about those protesters along the Pride Parade route yesterday or in the square. Why do you think that they care so much about who other people love and have sex with? Like, why is that? Why is it that among all the social issues that conservative evangelicals could focus on, income inequality, child poverty, racial injustice, anybody? They have fixated on this issue of like gay people and gay sex. Why do they care about it so much? The reason, I think, is that homosexuality, trans identity, and queerness in all of its forms challenges two of the pillars of the conservative worldview. What they see as the fixed nature of gender, which is very important to their idea of sexual relationships and relationships between genders, and what they see as the purely procreative purpose of sex. To the conservative mindset, these categories are literally sacred, central to the functioning of society. Without rigid gender norms and strict rules for sexual behavior, they believe civilization is literally under threat. So when a group of people comes along saying, gender's not so simple as that, men can love men and women can love women and sex can just be fun, they don't see a minority group asserting its equal dignity. They don't even hear an essentially humanistic argument about the rights of every person to pursue their own happiness, which they may disagree with, but they might sort of understand where it's coming from. What they see, I think, is a dangerous rabble of social revolutionaries chipping away at the foundation of civilization itself. And they are afraid. They're afraid of us. Despite the fact that until recently they held all the power and that they seek to subjugate us at every turn, they are afraid of us and what they think we're going to do to their culture. And that's why they're so passionate about an issue which really is none of their business. They're terrified. And the same, I think, is true of atheists. Because just as concepts of sex and gender are pillars of the conservative evangelical mindset, so is God and religion, obviously. When atheists come along and say, we don't need God to live fulfilling, meaningful, purposeful, ethical lives, that scares them too. We are doing away with one of the most important pillars of civilization in their mind. So it makes sense by a secular government and a secular society. And I want to spend a little time, and I'm going to put on my philosopher hat a bit, so stay with me. I want to spend a little time explaining what secular government means, because it is so often misunderstood, particularly by its opponents, right now. A secular government is not an atheist government. It's not a government run under the assumption of atheism, or which attempts to foist atheism on its citizens. Indeed, that sort of government will be deeply anti-secular. That is the opposite of what we want. Rather, a secular government is one which seeks not to impose any religion on its citizens, which tries to remain neutral in matters of religion, and which passes laws on the basis of reasons and evidence accessible to everybody, regardless of their religious beliefs. Thus, a secular government would seek to treat all citizens equally under the law, regardless of their religious or non-religious beliefs. The opposite of a secular government is a theocracy, meaning a government which itself has a religious character and agenda, where clerics or the doctrines of a particular religion rule. A government where laws are made specifically because they fulfill a religious conception of what is good, just, or right. Examples of theocracies include such wonderful nations as Saudi Arabia and Iran, which have, among other things, religious courts and religious police. Secularism is good for citizens and for religious institutions. It protects people from having religious views they don't want imposed upon them, which would violate their freedom of conscience. And it protects religious institutions from the undue influence of government, while allowing religious and non-religious people alike to participate in the civic process. In that way, secularism is not so much a wall of separation between church and state, as Jefferson put it. It's more of a protective sheath. Secularism is basically a civic condom, is what I'm saying, which enables church and state to have fun with each other without messy complications. That's what we're going for. The reason why the founders of this nation wanted a secular government, one in which people of different religions and no religion could collaborate for the common good, was to avoid the oppression of minority religions who might be targeted by a government if they had the wrong religious beliefs, and to avoid stifling religious diversity and expression. They didn't want the government sending police into churches, for instance, to tell preachers what they were allowed to say, nor did they want bishops or imams using the force of their religion to impose their beliefs on other people. They wanted to create one nation, indivisible, as the original Pledge of Allegiance declares. Secularism enables this. It protects individual conscience and collective religious expression. It's one of the most important innovations of the founders of this nation, and it played a huge part in creating the thriving, hugely diverse, energetic religious landscape that America has today. Secularism is a friend of religion, correctly conceived. Right now, however, secularism is under sustained and direct attack by conservative Christians. They quite literally want to make America into a theocracy, where laws are made on the basis of one group's religious beliefs. This is clear in their constant talk about America being a Christian nation, and in their explicitly religious nature of their political campaigns. And it's particularly clear when it comes to LGBTQ issues. And a sorry example of this came during the fight over the non-discrimination legislation here in Springfield, when Reverend John Lindell took to the pulpit of James River Church to ask his congregation, in explicitly Christian terms, to vote in favor of repeal. Let me be crystal clear about this. When he did that, he broke the covenant between religion and government established by the founders of this nation. By using his influence as a religious leader to directly manipulate the political process, he revealed himself to be a theocrat, someone who believes that all people should live by the rules of his religion, just like the imams of Iran or Saudi Arabia. He wants to impose his religious views through the power of the law. This is essentially forced Christianity. People who are not Christians, and Christians who take a different view to him, being forced to live under a religious regime which offends their conscience. Roger Williams, who was the founder of Rhode Island and one of the first supporters of the idea of secularism, once said, "Forced worship stinks in God's nostrils." This was the sort of thing he was worried about happening. Reverend Lindell is entitled to his beliefs, and he is entitled to preach his beliefs. No one is trying to deny him his freedom to speak and worship as he wishes. And it is a consistent lie of people who want to get rid of these protections, that they're being infringed upon by the government and unable to practice their religion. That is just a lie. But what he is not entitled to do, what the founding members of this nation wrote a constitution explicitly to prevent, is to force his religious views on other people using the strong arm of the law. His actions demeaned his country, and at least according to Roger Williams, demeaned his God. He might as well have stood up in his church pulpit and ripped up the Constitution of the United States. What he did was deeply un-American, and we have to consistently remind people of that fact. It's also deeply divisive. As I've read more and more about the campaign here, I've repeatedly been surprised, kind of flabbergasted honestly, to read the supporters of the repeal speaking about and regretting how much the vote divided the community. But of course it did. Not only were they explicitly seeking to oppress a minority community which has already suffered enough, thank you very much, not only did they conduct that campaign in a despicable and fear-mongering way, but they did so explicitly in the name of their religion, driving a wedge between those Christians who agree with their interpretation of Christianity, those who take a loving view of homosexuality, religious people who are not Christians, and the non-religious residents of this city. The vote was divisive because the repeal campaign was wicked and theocratic, and it was obviously going to be divisive because of that. So how do we move beyond that divisiveness? Well, we have to work together to ensure that Springfield becomes a place which respects every citizen as equal under the law, and a place which respects the religious conscience of individuals by passing laws only which promote the common good, regardless of a person's religion. That means installing a respect for secularism, and liberal religious people must work alongside non-religious people to achieve that. And that's going to be your job, I'm afraid, because I'm going home. I'll help however I can, but you have to do this. But I'm convinced, given everything that I've seen today and yesterday, that you have the strength and the courage and the commitment as a community to push back against the forces of division, to create one Springfield, indivisible. Thank you. me your question. What do you want? Is questions okay? Am I allowed to take questions? I don't even need to sit up here. Okay, I answered every question. Good. I'm done.
I have a question. Yesterday you talked about going to Christian school.
Yeah.
Which I did too.
Yeah.
And then you told a story today about your family being okay.
Yeah.
Is that because, and tell me why that's different.
So this relies a little bit on understanding the different religious landscape of the United Kingdom and the USA. Basically, all the great private schools of England are religious, in the sense that they were established, my private school was established more than 500 years ago in St. Paul's Cathedral by a dean of St. Paul's Cathedral. Obviously, it is a religious school in the sense that it has a religious heritage, it still has a chapel. Actually, I'll tell you something awesome about this. Actually, I'll tell you in a second. It's a great story, look out for it. So I pointed to the fact that it was a Christian school simply to say that did inform to some degree what that principal said, I think, about his viewpoint. I mean, he put it in an explicitly religious way, but that was very unusual. Like, I had never heard him speak in a religious way ever before, except in our school chapel, right, which is on the premises. So, in general, the UK is a lot less religious as a country, and those great high schools like Eton and St. Paul's where I went and all those other ones, they're religious historically, but like most of the UK, which is also a Christian nation literally because of the monarch is the head of the church and the head of the state, right? It's very secular in culture. And our school was not like a Bible bashing school or like a Christian conservative school. And add to that my parents were not religious and were never religious in their life. They didn't have any of that. So they sent me to that school because it's one of the best schools in the world, not because it was religious. They didn't care about that. The great story about my school, which illustrates how secular Britain has become, culturally speaking, is that not too long ago, the chapel on the grounds of my high school was struck by lightning and burnt down. It still makes me laugh. No one was hurt, luckily, but it's just like, and obviously it was insured and they had money to rebuild it. But they decided, in their wisdom, instead of rebuilding a school chapel, they would spend the money on building science labs. And I thought that was great. Yes. And that caused some consternation in the British press. You know, these are big institutions in Britain. So my school, you know, if that happens, it's national story. And some of the old Paulines, as we call them, I guess I'm one now, they wrote op-eds to the Times, you know, saying, this is terrible, blah, 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 blah. But everyone thought they were silly. So, you know, I thought I was very proud of my school for doing that. But basically, it's Christian nominally, but that was a very unusual instance, why it stuck in my mind so much. It was very unusual. Good question, thank you.
I think we're all worn out from party histories.
Okay.
In retrospect, do you think that if you had come out in the 10 years prior, that it would have been okay? Would they have been accepting, or do you think there was a change in landscape and perception that made it easier 10 years later?
There were plenty of people who were out while I was a teenager, like in the culture. I didn't actually know any. I didn't know any out gay kids in my school. It was an all-boys school of like 800 or something boys, so there must have been tons of gays running around, and they were all strapping young men. Like, they were all beautiful. Like, everyone who goes to my school is gorgeous. So I sometimes experience a sense of regret about that. Very infrequently, because I kind of investigated that and felt that the relationships I had with women that I would not have ever had turned out to be some of the most wonderful romantic and personal relationships of my life, and I think in at least a couple of cases of their lives too. And those relationships are very important to me, becoming the person who I became. So I kind of don't regret it in a sense, because it would mean wanting not to have those relationships. But I think I could have, I think it would have been, well, my parents would have been fine. I think the school would have, because I was kind of well known and popular at my school. I know it's difficult to believe, but I think it would have been awesome, actually. That's the thing I regret, is that I think I could have changed the culture and climate of that school, and I didn't. And I think that that is going to stay with me. One of the reasons why I like doing work like this now is because I regret that a lot. I regret missing that opportunity to make a difference. And I think it would have been great for the other closeted gay kids, who I know who they are. Some of them I don't think have come out still. It would have been great for the teachers too. We had tons of gay teachers who everyone knew was gay. See, the environment in the UK, the way we deal with uncomfortable social facts is that everybody knows about them, but you don't talk about them. Which is in a way better than outright homophobic bullying, right? Which there wasn't much of at all, of any bullying in any sort of my school. But it's in a way psychologically more damaging, because like, how are you supposed to deal as a kid with the fact that you know there are teachers who are gay, who like fill their whole room with pictures of male ballet dancers, right? But you're not allowed to talk about it or ask any questions about it. That's a really weird psychological position to be in. I think it would have been really good for those teachers to have awesome out gay kids around too. I actually tried, when I came out, I contacted my school and says, I want to come and give a talk about this, because I think there are kids who need to hear it, and I have this particular feeling that these sort of legacy institutions, I don't know, have you ever watched Downton Abbey or anything like that? You know how English high school, like these private schools are? They're like places where, you know, boys come to go to become men, you know? They're like, they have a certain ethos around them that is not particularly friendly to the idea of kind of gayness. And I wanted to kind of break that down a bit. So I contacted the principal, who we call the High Master, and which is kinky, isn't it, really? And I said I want to do a talk. I wouldn't mind setting up a support group for gay kids in the school, of ex-students who were out, you know, and they were so not about that. They definitely were not having that. And that really kind of shocked me, because it was like 2000.